Hey guys, Master Xeon here with part 3 of the Boltzn3ch time lapse. For this particular part 4, I'll be making some additional little greebles and assets that I'll be attaching to it. So we'll go ahead and speed it up by twice and start off throwing in a 6-point circle. When making these sort of things, I'm in a new plan file, so I'm just building these as additional assets I can then add on to it at a later time. But once I'm done with this whole project, I can also move this assets file into my directory where I'm keeping all these things. Right here, I wanted to just show you all the region overlap option, which allows the T and N panels that you see to be transparent on the viewport, which I thought was pretty cool. You're not able to see it a whole lot here, but you'll see it after there's stuff near that end. So I put an array. The origin point is still in the center, and which the empty is there that's controlling the array. And there's also a mirror modifier, so I'm only doing half the work to get these to match up. And the goal is to just build a circular shape while still having that inside. For these type of things, you know, there's a ton of workflows that you could use to model this sort of stuff. But I like to just experiment and find out which ways work better than others. And sometimes I find completely different ways of thinking, and that's my main goal with Blender nowadays, is to really just be more comfortable with the software and understand what these developers intended when they were building it as far as how it's supposed to be used. So modeling using arrays and mirrors isn't that bad. You just have to make sure that your points are merging at the end, so when you apply it, all the loops are continuous. So I applied a mirror, keep the array, keep everything circular, try to reshape it a bit. Raise the distance. Duplicate it, move it to layer 10 in case I want to play with it later in a different way. And we'll use this UV sphere to project it on. Now, whenever it comes to modeling, it's important to be the master of your origin, be the master of your orientation. Be aware of your object's rotation and orientation and where its origin points are, because these sort of things is the main cause of frustration behind using the tools and not getting them to deform or react to your mesh properly or getting the intended results that you're wanting. So just always be aware of your origin point. Know that pressing Ctrl-Alt-Shift-C lets you align your origin point to the geometry, where the 3D cursor is, and one of my favorite and most used commands. So we applied a shrink wrap, and from here I just began shaping this little hub. We'll select all the interior circles and extrude them down, flatten it, extrude it down more. And that's pretty much it for this part. Just add a couple of perimeter loops to give it a more interesting form. SZ0 makes everything flatten on the Z-axis, just like SX0 or SY would do it on those particular axes. Add a ring in the middle, give it a look like it's been separated. And so prior to doing this video, I went on Google and just was looking at various models of mechanical things. Just look for like interesting little pieces that I thought just caught the eye and made it more interesting as a model, while still thinking of the needs that I need to fulfill with them with the original model. So for this video and the next video, I'll be focusing mainly on getting the wing to look a lot better. In the last video where I left off in the render y'all are seeing, I don't even think the wing was pictured because I wasn't very pleased with its appearance. Since I went ahead and built it, I'm going to stick with it and get it to fit no matter what, even though it's not part of the concept. But that comes up actually in the next video. For this one, it's mainly just focusing on building little knickknacks. So for this, it's a curved circular padding, and so go through, fill the faces in between them all, And then I try to actually mirror and it and then fit it on top of it to get it offset. And I don't know, I was thinking about it wrong and it just didn't work. And so I just find out I have doubles, W, remove those, flip this on the x-axis with SY -1, and then I just try to fit that up. And that starts working. However, I begin to feel that I can just duplicate and reduce the amount of work needed. So whenever it comes to merging vertices that are laying on top of each other, instead of using W merge or Alt M, I believe, I just used the remove doubles command and then raise the threshold on the side by the T panel, and that is a really good way to get these things to merge together properly. You'll see me use it here on the side, where I could just go through merging all of these and repeating the command over and over, or I can just select these loops and raise the distance till they say howdy neighbor, and there we go. So it's beginning to really come together, and maybe now I can move these pieces over here, but I can't. I'll remove those doubles and make everything fit miraculously. There's definitely some power in the commands that we have at our disposal as far as modeling, but I ended up getting rid of that whole segment. And so I try snapping them, and I realize at some point they've become horribly offset, and so I have to just move them manually. Just using vertex snapping to just snap it to the correct vertex, in which I can do the same on the side. I try to make short work of it until actually they all became accurate. So I remove the doubles, lower the threshold so they don't remove all the nice handiwork I'm doing. And I take a look at it with Control R and loop cut, but don't add any loops just to see how it works out. And it looks like they're all continuous, so round off the form, fill in this mess in the back. Let's merge these three, just, round that off. So I want to shrink wrap this object to a cylinder and make it curve into the shape of this cylinder. So we'll convert that to wire just so I can see it. And since I'm the master of my origin, I could just project it downward negatively on the Z and then manipulate the cylinder and control the final shape that this gets. Circular and rounded hard surface modeling is something that I used to struggle with quite a bit when I first started 3D, and so the techniques that I'm using here is just what I've come up with over time, just building things day in and day out. Like I said, there's really a lot of power in your shortcuts, so learn them. We'll just inset the edge, make it hard, and we got a nice little padding here. Move that to layer 1, and we'll just set it here, just goofing off with placement, see what ideas come to mind, like a crazy propeller or something, I don't know. And we'll move this from layer 10 after making a duplicate to layer 2 and get to work on making something else. Select these edge loops and press I to add an inset extrude and make them tighter. And now we have that nice rounded beveling effect. Go in view subdivision mode and edit mode, which is that fourth option on the subsurf modifier. That just makes it look a little smoother in edit mode. Usually I stick with no subdivisions at all in edit mode, so I'm dealing with an entirely honest mesh and nothing deceptive. So at this point I begin creating a bolt. I start playing with the options, try to see if there's some way I can remove all those subdivisions I see on the side by the threads. Because, you know, bolts is something that you're going to spam everywhere, and I want to use as much geometry as I can to really catch that light whenever it's rendering. Alright, so this video, video 4 is also a re-recording. The one yesterday I realized was not recording me talking, but recording the things that I thought it was not supposed to be recording, which would have made a pretty interesting video for y'all to see, but not intended. So the decimate modifier is something that they've added newly to Blender, and I'm determined to figure out what it's good for. And I do figure it out. I use it in hopes that decimating this bolt would work out. However, as you can see in the middle of it, it does create some pretty complex geometry that's triangles, so that's not going to divide well. In fact, having a smooth on is not going to divide well, so I begin separating pieces. Separate that, give it that hard surface look without subdivision. And that's just by splitting edges with Y, or you know, even separating it with P when you're in edit mode and you have a selection. So right here I fill in the phase, I'll knife across to make it quads, and then I actually try to take these two faces and then put them all around. However, not keeping in mind that the rotation is something that is off, so none of these will actually stick properly. Or maybe they do. Alright, I guess they do. Excellent. So right here I scale it down, so I make another extrusion so that way it's not so rounded at the bottom like an udder. And then by using the 3D cursor that's in the center of my universe that I model everything around, I also use the spin modifier and just make additional bolts. Now whenever you use the spin modifier, whenever you use spin and in the option on the left and you use 360, do remember that in the final area it does create a double of the original, so you have to remove that one. So another useful tip. So I end up making quite a few of these knickknacks. I decide that I want to create some sort of surface that actually is grooved closer to the rim and has holes in it, which is similar to the other shape. I probably could have manipulated that to get the same thing, but I decided I wanted to try a different technique. And I do make quite a few mistakes during the modeling of this, but as you see by the end of it, I do correct it fairly good. So I tried using X-ray to make the cylinder more visible. However, this kind of confuses me since it's not occluded by the geometry in front of it. So I just separate the circle and then hide the rest. And now I have the circle that I can begin tracing around. Now, whenever you have the mirror and you're modeling in the middle, it can be a bit annoying to have to deal with like right here I try to extract out and it doesn't work. So instead I just hold Control and click, and it allows me to extract past the mirror point where it's currently clipping. And right here I find myself having to do a little bit of figuring. I want this to be quadded off, but I don't want it to be ugly with the geometry like it is right there. So I end up making another perimeter loop around it and then just adding some adjacent edge loops to support it, which work out well in the end. Um, this is kind of like the Sudoku of Blender to me, like solving geometry. It's like a mystery, right? Like you have to figure out a way that looks good. If you don't make it looking, if you don't have your geometry looking like it's well thought out, then you won't want to show off your wireframes because it'll just be ugly. Um, and I'm a big fan of having nice, beautiful geometry, and geometry that looks like it's sensible and makes sense, but something that also is impressive just as a wireframe render, which I like quite a bit, but my friends and girlfriend don't really get, and clay renders too don't get those. But it's like when you look at a render of ambient occlusion pass. And so I planned on using an array to spin this around on. So you got to turn off the relative offset and set it to be your empty. And I realize I haven't been the master of my rotational location, so I apply that with Control A. And then I realized that there's no way I can rotate this and it works out. However, that part does look cool, and I should have stuck with it and made that into something, but I didn't. So I move it up, and right here is actually the more puzzling part, right? Like I want to rotate, I want it to be continuous, but I don't want to have to model anymore on it. I just want it all to fit. And so that's me figuring out exactly where to raise it on its z-axis and exactly how to rotate the empty. However, when spinning to make this, the numbers that you use for your rotation um, can be anywhere from, you know, 0 to 360 on your rotation. So to find the magical number, I just get it where it looks like it's fairly close. Like I'll be spinning it and it looks pretty good at like 60.65 or 60.61.30 or something, random numbers, and I'll just round it down to what would probably fit. And so right here I decided I'm going to shrink wrap it to try to get the final shape before working on the array. And now from here it's just a matter of making it all fit. However, I do realize that the rotation's off and that trying to correct it won't work, so I just reset the rotation and find out the magic number is 60. And I do see that the geometry at this point is looking pretty bad, but once I get the form set up, then I can go ahead and correct all that. And there's probably a ton of other ways that I could have went about making this particular part, but this way seemed to have worked the best. So right here I'm removing the doubles, try to get everything to fit. I find that these two are just too far away to remove the doubles, so it's just easier to just merge them. And what I usually do is if it's a repetitive thing like this, I'll merge it with Alt-M, choose center, and then just from there go around, make the next two selections, just use Shift-R to repeat it. Take the faces I made here and extrude them in. And I forgot that face snapping is on, so I turn that back off. Smoothing is also something important for this type of modeling. Whenever you get the chance to, if everything's all constrained, you want to go in and try to smooth it to, get the geometry to have even distribution. As you can see, there's some areas where it's tight, and it's actually unnecessary. In fact, looking back on this in retrospect, I could probably have made this twice as efficiently using way less. Alright, and I'm back. Had to free up about 100 gigs of hard drive space to continue recording. Um, where was I? Yes, filling in the faces. So I try to take the easy way out, or I don't at this part. I thought I was. No, I take the other easy way out, where I duplicate the faces and then use vertex snapping to get it to the correct points. And here I fail to notice that all the points are not meeting up. But I think it works out. And so I'll press F to fill the face, I to add an inset, and hope that that does it. However, Ngons aren't good to have in your geometry for various reasons. Me personally, sometimes I'm not sure what shape they have. Like if you dissolve a bunch of verts and you have on a complex mesh, uh, you're the Ngon shape. You're just not sure what it is. And UV unwrapping them is something I still haven't even figured out. Every time I have an Ngon involved, I can tell because the UV map comes out looking pretty bad. So I noticed that by laying these two on top of each other, I got a pretty cool looking item. So I was experimenting with that for a second. I do decide to try and make it, but I end up scrapping the idea and realizing that this is enough of this type of part to go back to the original model. However, I do want to make a series of hoses. And so with the hoses, I decided to start off with a curve and then or a path, and then just change it up a little bit, duplicate it, choose only one on the top, turn on proportional, go to random, and just rotate them to get random wiring that's coiling. And that look works out pretty good, so now I just add in a Bezier circle and make that the bevel object on the curve. So I can scale the circle, and that'll choose the size of the curve, or I can just go in curves and just press Alt-S to scale it in just certain areas if I was going for like tentacles or something like that. But with tentacles, you probably wouldn't want to use curves. You probably want to use an arrayed mesh that has suckers, I guess. So more pull it. I don't want the cables to really cut through each other. And this is just to hang out the bottom of the machine and make it look like it's been ripped out of something. duplicate the object. I'll take one of them and convert it to a mesh, move that to another layer. Still some intersections, try to smooth it. And there we go. So I'll convert them to a mesh, join them together. And there's the thing with curves that I despise so much, is the fact that it has 32 divisions on the side. So I use unsubdivide and try to collapse it. And I end up with a pretty nicely decimated object that doesn't have nearly as many vertices, so I can maybe spam it more frequently. We'll call that wire mesh. So at the top of all of the curves, it got rid of everything and kept it as quads except for the tips where it made a bunch of ugly tries. You'll see me deal with that later on some other wires, but at this point I'm just testing to see how they fit, and I realized that maybe I should have had them all converge at the base and then come out and coil at different lengths, and that would have probably been a bit more interesting. But the video's never over. I could always go back and just make another correction. This is the part where I try to model them together. So I scale the pieces to see what way would work best for this kind of form. However, I take a look at this geometry, and then I take a look at this geometry, and I realize that making those two fit together would be another hour or something, or 20 minutes just in itself. So I should just name these as quick as I can and just get out while I still can. And now I go back into my actual file. So the wings are just not very satisfactory in my opinion, but we'll come back to that. So I go in my file and just import all my meshes that I made, link them in, just move them down for now, and just take random pieces and see how they fit. This piece is one of my favorites. Also lose the bolts in the process of doing all this, so I'll probably put those back, but you know, you're not even looking under the model, so the bolts aren't even that essential. And that's a pretty suitable ending for the bottom part of the body. So now I'll just bring the wires in and plug them up, scale to fit. And I try moving it around the vertices, however, that ends up making them look like ribbons, so I decide against it and just stick with the idea of just using something that maybe deforms it in a uniform manner. What object does that? Oh, I know, a lattice. So we throw in a lattice. The lattice will deform it uniformly, get it to fit. Add suspends, remove the ones on the inside so I don't have to deal with it. And after, selecting both objects, lattice last, using Control P, and choosing lattice deform, I can make it both the parent and the deformation object with the modifier added in the modifier stack without me having to go through all those additional clicks. And I try to figure out a place for this piece to go. but the piece is too tall. So I decide I can insert it up in the body and call it a day, or I can just delete a large segment of it and make it fit. And these faces stop it from snapping properly. Delete those, and now it's fitting in. However, for this part I can just remove doubles and get rid of those selections and just play with the distance. Case closed. And so right here I'm just mixing and matching, just throwing in pieces, seeing what fits where, to just try to add more visual interest to the form. To the model. Go ahead and delete this top part. Scale on Z, that just gets rid of my whole circles. Idea that I've been working so hard to get curved and solidified. So I end up just deleting that. Save the file. Save the file again. Name the wings. Save the file. And link in the wings from it. So this is where I began focusing on just the wings. Now since the wings were set to mirror the helmet, it also imported the helmet, which I'll just remove. Is what we're looking at. So the top part looks kind of cool. It's like, makes me think of something Gundam related. However, the bottom part just looks so Fisher Price. And so I think, maybe adding wires might make it look cool. It doesn't. In the end, I realized just getting rid of the piece altogether is going to be the only thing that does the job. However, if I would have made it segmented pieces or something like that, then I think it also would have had more visual interest, but that's just my own personal preference. And so I place these curves with care, only for me to go back later and just redo it all, delete them, go with a completely different scheme. But still, Blender allows a pretty good concepting process, especially if you have your pieces built in advance. You're able to just drop and mix and match pretty easily and just delete things, import them, and play with it. And that's the same functionality that, it's also come to ZBrush with the micro mesh and insert brushes and goodness that that program is experiencing. But enough about ZBrush on a Blender video. I start looking at that and I'm like, maybe if they're going on the other side, that'll look even cooler. Now, another thing I should have done while those other items that I was building were still small assets is UV unwrap them. Since all these things are, pieces upon pieces just in conjunction with each other, it's actually a pretty good idea to have the UV unwrapping done so setting it up on the map is no problem. But I decided to just build it all unified so I can just UV unwrap it all at the same time and just work on my workflow for that. Because there's a couple of things that I'm just not as good at as I wish I was. It's definitely the rigging and the UV unwrapping. Like I said, UV unwrapping complex items can be a little difficult at times, and especially getting them all to fit on the same map while giving things ample amount of room to be able to be. Just loop cuts, insets, and skeleton parts to try to give more visual interest. So right here, since it's all smoothed out, I'm able to put a notched hole in it pretty easily. So it's about this point I realized that something's going to have to give. And so finally, I go in and just begin deleting this piece altogether. And now I think I can actually come up with something a little more sci-fi-ish out of this and more mechanical. And so that's basically what I was thinking when I was modeling this part. And just filling in the faces using a mirror point as the convergence. I just bring them all to meet and then just fill in the faces for the parts that are adjacent. Nothing fancy here, just trying to get a form together to fill in this space, that's this big void that's been left by this Fisher Price piece that I deleted. So we'll just stick a pipe there. Now in edit mode, you can also do lasso select by holding control while clicking in the viewport to select in the shape of a lasso. And we'll just duplicate this hub and spin it in there to add more visual interest. So I had to also add some little pieces here to just fill in this area that I thought was just a little lacking. Just put in a couple of edge loops. Alright, so I'm just goofing off here, trying to make it look more mechanical, just adding in more doodads. Probably should have made more of a variety, but the circular ones were the ones that I was focusing on for this portion of the modeling. And so we'll just add some curves in and move them over and just snap them to fit. Alright, just adding more stuff onto it, just digging myself in deeper to have to do the UV and wrapping on this thing. I'm sitting here reading a board actually on the internet about people that have things that they go through in their brain while modeling last even into the real world, which is kind of funny. It's like these people are talking about how on the street and at the supermarket they see wireframes on people and stuff like that. Pretty funny. So at this point I'm using a lattice to deform the little hub to get it to fit around the circular form. It's not as easy as it looks, but using wireframe I think I can get it pretty close. And all I'm trying to do is just create an area for the wires to connect into. Use Alt B, isolate part of the viewport. And there we go, the hoses are connected. And it looks like it could also be some sort of like sci-fi axe if I put some sort of laser blade on it. So maybe I might experiment with that in the future if I need to make a sci-fi weapon or something. Just saying. Alright, now I got some little hubs created, so that way the hoses aren't just curves plugged into this circular disc that doesn't truly fit. So I duplicate these pieces and make a separate mesh, delete those faces so I can select this and delete that whole part. And this is where I try to create some like edging effect, but I end up losing it in the orientation of rotating all this mess and end up having to just delete it. But I just duplicated the faces. I'm just cutting them off to try to add a solidify onto it after getting it to be a little bit closer to the shape I want. So I press S, then press Shift Y, so that way I can scale it on the X and the Z without the Y getting any sort of adjustment. And we render this puppy out again. And that's looking a bit more satisfactory. And I realized that I need to go in and adjust the environment. The environment that I have on my default file doesn't actually make sense. So I changed it to a mixed shader with the background and the sky being modulated by the factor of the camera ray. And that allows it to show only blue where I'm looking, and then the environment everywhere where the object's being illuminated.